It's the Security Weekly News. Again, I'm Doug White, and it's episode 356. Welcome to the week of 21 January 2024. We've got RoboJoe, Apple, VMWARE, AI Vision, Confluence, Scarcruft, Microsoft, Jason Wood, and more on this edition of the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for the Security Weekly News.
Application Security Weekly delivers interviews and news from the worlds of AppSec, DevOps, and all the other ways people find and fix software flaws. Join us as we explore how the latest news highlights modern security practices and reminds us of the missing ones. We also bring insights from interviews on topics from training to threat modeling, from open source tools to cloud-native techniques, plus an occasional reference from new wave to synthwave. Find us at securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Application Security Weekly wherever you pick your podcasts.
Yay, welcome to the Security Weekly News. I'm Doug White. It's another week, another news show. Here we are. Well, Apple updated their iOS to version 17.3 this week. I'd seen that. And Mac OS went to Sonoma 14.3. The two updates patch at least 16 documented vulnerabilities. The Cupertino company has called urgent attention to 3 WebKit security problems that are being exploited in the wild as 0 days. So we probably want to patch up. Apple, as is their want, did not release any information hardly about it other than saying, fix this. You know, that's the Apple approach is like problem, fix, patch. Although, you know, makes sense. But they didn't release much about it. They didn't release any technical details. They didn't release any indicators of compromise. Fix, patch, iPhone, you patch. But basically the conclusion and very terse advisory from Apple says, you should probably patch your Apple devices ASAP. Some of these vulnerabilities had led to arbitrary code execution remotely. Of course, the ultimate in horror. So if you are an Apple user, patch up. They're not going to warn you dramatically. They're just going to put a little notice on your phone that says you might want to consider patching this. Yeah, so you should probably. Evidence in this article says that a Chinese cyber espionage group has been exploiting a VMware vCenter server vulnerability as a 0-day since possibly 2021. This was a report from Mandiant. That flaw has a CVSS score of 9.8, and it's an out-of-bounds write bug in vCenter involving the DCERPC protocol, which would allow someone who has network access to execute arbitrary remote code. These are, of course, like I said, this is the ultimate in cyber horror, right? So if you're watching cyber horror movies, they're all about arbitrary remote code execution with no authentication. Like, you know, the code is coming from inside the house. Exactly. The vulnerability was patched by VMware back in October, but as we all know, VMware is tough to patch. I mean, it's not exactly like just hit the button and sitting back and smoking a cigar while the patch runs. It's like pretty involved. The vulnerability was so severe, apparently, that there was very little which could be done about it except to patch it. So there weren't any workarounds or mitigations or anything. It was just like, you got to fix this with a patch. And VMware was so concerned about it, they actually released patches for stuff that was end of life. I mean, really, I mean, that's saying something. A new update to this said that the vulnerability was being exploited in the wild, and Mandiant on Friday said that this likely started a year and a half ago, and that a sophisticated Chinese espionage group they call UNC 3886, no name, how sad, they don't have a name? I'm going to call them tossed octopus. You heard that, Mandiant, tossed octopus. But the analysis of the exploit said that there were symptoms to be found in the service crash logs, which show that the VMDIRD service would crash just before they deployed a backdoor on the system. The problem was patched in vCenter 8.0U2, And there are fixes for previous versions as well. So you can no longer use the excuse, I'm running vCenter 7 or vCenter 6 or vCenter 3. They did release patches all the way back into the 3X era, if you can imagine that. I don't even remember 3X. That's a long time ago. But VMware has advised that you should be applying these patches as soon as possible. So, you know what to do. Everyone's afraid of AI. As we all know. I mean, yesterday I was asking ChatGPT questions about SQL queries, and it started reading the Necronomicon in ancient Sumerian, I think. And I think before I killed the job, it was summoning Cthulhu and the ancient ones. Or it might just have been trying to tell me how to do a non-correlating subquery, but I'm not sure. It might have also been trying to read me a recipe for a pie made from wheat. I couldn't tell. But according to this article, human labor can accomplish some jobs more cheaply than computer vision systems. Not exactly time for replicants yet. And Elon is apparently planning to strap humans to the hood of a Cybertruck instead of a camera because it'll really cut down on the costs. So there's just going to be a guy named Billy on the hood of your Cybertruck going, turn right now. It's a lot cheaper than putting a camera up there. But this study, which actually came from MIT, did a survey to try and find out what capabilities computers would need to be able to do in order to replace these workers. So I don't know. That's a fun survey to get. Like, we're replacing you with a computer. Fill out this form to tell us what you should be doing. But anyway, they took that, they added up the cost of building an AI vision system that would replace the human. And these are all like vision-oriented tasks. I thought it was a little bit misguided in the sense that, I mean, it's an academic paper, so it's just like, boom, fixed point in time. But, Moore's law and all that stuff means that as we go forward, the cost of these AI systems is going to plummet. But it is an interesting study. And in the study, they found that only 23% of the workers' wages that were being paid for vision-oriented tasks would actually be attractive to automate, meaning that the workers were cheaper than the automation. Like one of these was like looking at like expired goods in a kitchen or something like that. So more than 75% of the workers were not being replaced by AI at that point. Now, I don't know. I mean, AI is starting to get really scary. I mean, every time I use ChatGPT, I'm like impressed by it. I get, I'm kind of scared of it. I'm like, I think this could probably replace us all and probably will. But I mean, it's super awesome too. I mean, maybe ChatGPT can replace me to read the news. Oh, wait, no, you can't. ChatGPT is way more expensive than what I'm getting paid and I think it's free, but it's still more expensive than what they're paying me. Anyway, it's an interesting article if you are interested in such things and want to read more about it. Shadow Server is a threat monitoring service and they announced yesterday that their system had recorded thousands of attempts to exploit a critical flaw on the Atlassian Confluence data center and server. There have been a lot of problems with this whole thing in recent times. They said they observed 39,048 total events on 602 unique IP addresses where people were trying to attack Atlassian Confluence. The attack is a pre-auth, a template injection, remote code execution. Yikes. I mean, that's a long name. What's the acronym for those? Petersi? Pierce, Floyd, I don't know, but I'm not sure. But in the 600 IPs, they said if they were that they were testing callbacks and whoami execution. So the people that were trying these things were seeing if the vulnerability existed. They weren't trying to do anything. They were just seeing if they had vulnerable devices out there, which literally is like the precursor to a bunch of attacks. Like when you see the enemy flying over in a blimp going, no, we're not attacking. We're just flying over, looking at the scenery. It's beautiful. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, guess what's next? The vulnerability affects out-of-date versions of Confluence. So SC Media said that the Atlassian customers who were using Confluence Data Center and Server version 8 are affected if they have not upgraded to version 8.5.4, which was released on the 5th of December. And the article advises updating to version 8.5.5 immediately. So if you're using this, check your versions and make sure you're patched. The vulnerability has a CVSS score of 10. Since it allows remote code execution in a low complexity attack with no authentication required. Now, how much would you pay? That's a very, very scary vulnerability that can be done like that. A similar earlier flaw, the one you may be familiar with, required authentication. So you actually had to be able to log in somehow. This one, not so. This latest one was found by Petrus Viet on the 13th of December in an Atlassian bug bounty program. So look, it's really, really bad. And it's really easy to do, and they're trying to do it. So if you have one of these systems, patch today, or you'll be in the news tomorrow. Microsoft Outlook has a vulnerability that can apparently leak your hashed passwords via a malicious calendar invite, and it's only one of 3 exploits that were released by Microsoft last week. The Outlook and Windows exploits are pretty easy to do per Varonis. The Outlook issue was actually patched back in December, and the other 2 issues, which involve Windows Performance Analyzer and Windows File Explorer, were ignored by Microsoft due to what they, quote, called a moderate severity. It's not that bad, I guess. You know, Microsoft said that the behavior in the 2 Windows bugs were not considered a vulnerability. Varonis disagreed and said it was basically a legitimate attack vector, but Microsoft said no patch. No patch for you. But basically what the first one does is a calendar invite comes to you, and a calendar invite, if you're not familiar with the process, opens an iCalendar file. So this is a file that is downloaded that has the invite information in it. So if you accept the invite, it basically downloads this file. That file, it comes from a foreign server, and they put something on there. And then the file gets shared between the 2 calendars. Now, if the attacker gets you to click this invite, apparently a hash password is exposed to the attacker when Outlook attempts to authenticate on the attacker's machine to retrieve the iCalendar file. So it's exposing the password. If the password's exposed, obviously somebody can try to break it. And so be careful about what you accept and from whom. I mean, that's going to be difficult for a lot of people, but for me, I reject all invites anyway. But a patch is available, so just patch and you'll be fine, okay? The really hard to say Scarcruft, I had to keep checking that because I was confused by it. Scarcruft. I kept wanting to say Starcraft, Scarcraft, Scarcruft. Yeah, anyway, Scarcruft is a North Korean advanced persistent threat group, and apparently they're ramping up attacks on cybersecurity researchers and other members of the threat intel community. Their objective is to likely, I mean, this is all hypothetical, is likely trying to steal non-public threat intel and add to their bag of tricks. Sentinel Labs said that Scarcruft, which is also called Inky Squid, a much better name, Red Eyes, yet another better name, and Reaper, the best one of all those sound, I don't know what those, all of them are better than Scarcruft. I don't know who came up with that. But anyway, they basically spent November and December last year targeting media organizations and think tank personnel that focus on North Korean affairs using, you know, your typical impersonation type attacks that are expected to continue this year. You know, you get a contact on LinkedIn. I got one yesterday. I had somebody inviting me to participate in some kind of seminar group about something I didn't know anything about. I was pretty sure that one was fraudulent. I had somebody offering to take a job with me that I'm pretty sure was fraudulent and so forth. But Sentinel Labs said that researchers now have come across new in-development malware and some trial infection chainings that would suggest that a new, more sophisticated offensive is actually starting. The group's been using a threat report on Kim Suk-hee, which is another North Korean actor. And they're using that as a lure. So they're like, we got all this inside intel on Kim Suk-hee if you want to download it. And so they offer this legitimate report, which was published last October by Genians, which is a South Korean cybersecurity company, legitimate. And they're using it as bait. So basically what they do is they offer you intel on a competing group that you might have heard of as bait for the attack. Their goal is to get you to download all this and, of course, click on some links that will then deliver RockRat, which is a custom Trojan they developed, which allows a range of surveillance on target entities. If you want all the grim details about it, it is in the article. You know, I mean, basically my philosophy is beware of North Koreans bearing gifts, even if the gifts are offering to rat out other North Koreans. Yeah, that sounds suspicious to me in one thing, but at the same time, these things are constant on LinkedIn and other platforms where they're just constantly approaching you. I had somebody offer me a report the other day and said, would you like to use this on your show? It's a report about this group. It has all kinds of details. It sounded a lot like this attack. I declined, but you know how it is. Federal regulators in the United States are cracking down on companies that sell your most personal information, including one of the first of its kind actions last week that will prohibit a broker from selling a user's precise location data. Now, didn't come from Congress, unfortunately, but this comes from the Federal Trade Commission, which is called the FTC in the United States. And it was part of an agreement to settle allegations that a data aggregation company called In-Market Media failed to get consent from users before they used location data for marketing and advertising purposes. The deal will bar the company from selling, licensing, or sharing any product that targets users based on sensitive location data. And now this is just a week after they had already blocked OutLogic, which was a location data broker, which used to be called Xmode Social, because they keep changing their names so people have trouble figuring out who they are. But it used to be called Xmode Social. And they were also selling location data that revealed information about a person's medical visits. Now, this was the first time that the agency made a deal like this. So the FTC in the U.S. has said that they are targeting these types of data brokers as an enforcement priority. And it's just too bad Congress can't pass some laws to protect privacy, but I guess they got better things to do. The Biden administration, that's the president of the United States, the Biden administration has pushed for an expansion of privacy protections in the wake of the U.S. Supreme Court decision overturning Roe versus Wade, which was about abortion if you're not from the United States and you haven't seen that. Once that was overturned by the Supreme Court, a lot of fear started that states, especially states where they want to ban abortion and so forth, would start trying to track what people were doing when they went out of state. And that was, of course, that first case. Biden had asked the FTC to take new steps to protect sensitive user data back in July of 2022. Well, a famed child star, he played cute little Jimmy Wilson in the hit show Sick in the Head with the tagline, "That smells funny," and then went on to a troubled adolescence where he turned to cat juggling, the abuse of ether, and rejected the use of the Oxford comma. But after a stint in rehab, he cleaned up his act and now tours as a one-man production of Miami Vice, playing both Crockett and Tubbs, the musical. Please welcome Jason Wood.
I'll have you know I have argued with a college professor about the need to use the Oxford comma, so there.
Use it. I'm a college professor, and you can argue with me about it.
I was told, no, that's not necessary. Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Anyhow. So Doug and I had a little bit of a fight over this one, but I managed to apparently come out on top basically by virtue of posting my stories before he did, about Microsoft's disclosure last Friday, that they had been successfully attacked by Midnight Blizzard, who we may know as Cozy Bear or APT29 or a handful of other names that are out there. And basically they were attacked by a password spraying, the password spraying attack that turned into eventually a compromise of senior Microsoft leaders. Their, as they put it, their senior leadership team. The coverage of this breach has been scathing, to say the least, as you look around the different news sources and read interviews and stuff like that. Ars Technica, for example, pulled no punches in their critique of Microsoft, quoting a number of people who just really castigated them for their failure to prevent it and not discover it for almost 2 months. Now, the disclosure itself is a quick blog post, and I've got the link to that in the show notes, but it's really short on details itself. The summary of the intrusion takes up an entire 2 paragraphs, the first 2 paragraphs, and then the rest of it just talks about what they're doing in response to this. The short version is that in late November 2023, the attacker performed the password spray attack. This got them into a, and I quote, legacy non-production test tenant account. Did we make that sound unimportant enough yet? Except that initial access gave them their foothold that over the next month and a half to 2 months before Microsoft discovered it, the attacker was able to leverage that and get access to, as they use this account's permissions, that was another quote, to access, another quote, a very small percentage of Microsoft corporate email accounts, end quote, which just happened to consist of the Microsoft senior leadership team, people in security, legal, and other unnamed functions. So yikes. Now, there's all kinds of phrasing in here to make it sound like it's not that big of a deal, but a very small percentage of accounts in a company of Microsoft's size can still become a lot of accounts. And it doesn't have to be a lot of accounts when the attacker goes after specific people like the senior leadership team and all the folks that leaders in security that they're interested in. So yeah, they didn't get all of the company's email accounts, just all the important ones to them anyhow. Microsoft said that the attacker initially, in quotes there, targeted emails about themselves. So they were looking for information about Midnight Blizzard and what does Microsoft say about them and what do they have going on? Now, the word initially catches my attention because that seems to indicate that this evolved over time. They started out there and then it sounds like they started looking at other things. Now, Microsoft was quick to, they added in there that, hey, no customer data was impacted by this. They never had access to customer environments in their cloud services or anything like that. But it really doesn't look like Microsoft customers were the point of this attack. Anyhow, they weren't the target. Microsoft was. The remaining 5 paragraphs were devoted to talking about all of the changes that they're going to be making, which, interestingly enough, said that they were going to put a greater emphasis on applying security controls, even if it meant breaking business processes, which I found to be notable because, that's usually the death knell for any security controls is if it's going to interfere with any kind of business process, you're not allowed to do it. End of story. Apparently, this attack has shook enough senior people that they're okay with breaking some stuff now if it means that they accelerate and push out stronger controls to a number of their services and systems. So big change of philosophy here. I'm kind of curious as to what processes are going to break and if any of those are customer facing and how that plays out. Now, as many people have been quick to point out, successful password spray attack means that there's no multi-factor authentication in place on the initial system or service and the account that was in use. Now, this could be because it was a legacy service that didn't support it, MFA, or somebody just said, this account's just a test account. We don't care. We're not going to put MFA on it. It doesn't matter. It's not that sensitive, whatever it is. But it still was leveraged to get to, senior leadership team emails and stuff like that. So, and data was exported from those email inboxes. So definitely was not that unimportant, right? One of the things I've noticed with Microsoft's multi-factor authentication, particularly in the cloud services, they have a number, I think it was like over 50 some odd login portals that are available, some of them with different levels of admin access to different things. And not all of them support MFA. You can turn MFA on and require it for an account, but you hit some of these other portals and it's just not supported. So then it just defaults to username and password, and that's good enough. So we don't know if that's the case here or what happened, but there it is. Now they said, hey, this is a test account. It wasn't in production. All of the things that make it seem less important than and make it like we don't have to do very much to it. They used all of those keywords there, and I'm sure a lot of folks looked at it and said, yeah, this is not that big a deal, so the risk is lower. We don't have to deal with this or put the same controls in place on it because production, that's more serious. We got to protect that to a higher level. Now, I have run into these types of hosts during penetration tests, and I was always happy to see them, which meant that if your people in offensive security are happy to see them, your defenders are probably not going to be happy to find out about this. These systems, and they represent the initial break into an organization, and then you can gather information, pivot, do whatever it takes to get other credentials, things like that, and move deeper into the environment. And that's certainly the way it has worked out for me. Or you have some of these accounts that get compromised, like in this case, where it sounds like it was overly privileged and it had access to things that it wasn't supposed to. Microsoft did indicate that this account's privileges were sufficient to get access to the emails. So I don't know, was it overprivileged, or did they use that to use that to get greater information and just pivot and get additional credentials and permissions, elevate their privileges rather? I don't know. They didn't say. They just had that one line in there. Anyhow, yeah, it's lots of effort to play this down, except that, play down the seriousness of this account, except that it was obviously very serious. This is a rough attack, and this is one of the nightmare scenarios out there that probably wouldn't be deemed very credible if somebody proposed it for like a tabletop exercise or a simulation, because, people who are running it would tell them, no, come back with something that is reasonable, that is likely to happen. Because there's no way you're going to go from that system over here with these type of credentials or whatever and elevate to this level. Except that it's really not that far-fetched, because again, you get that initial access and you can use that to gather more information. For example, a colleague and I compromised one of these unimportant systems, had no data on it that was particularly important, nothing that we could find on it that was interesting. But by the time we were done with it, we leveraged it to full control over their domain. And we could have gone in, had we tried, and given ourselves access to, things like email inboxes and stuff like that, and collect data from there. Not the point of our penetration test, but, when you have domain admin access, you can start moving that way pretty quickly. The biggest difference there is, that was on-prem. This sounds like this was a cloud environment. So, the attacker just gained control of that environment. Microsoft obviously has been targeted by a skilled group, but I would caution folks against saying that only companies like Microsoft get targeted by state-sponsored groups. I have seen myself intrusions conducted against very small organizations by state-sponsored attackers. And beyond that, you don't even have to worry about state-sponsored folks. The criminal stuff with the ransomware operators, they're getting really good and very skilled as well. State-sponsored groups aren't the only ones that are skilled around this. So, I think really it's just, hey, what happens if somebody who knows what they're doing and knows how to get around not only our on-prem systems, but our cloud systems and whatever applications that we have, what if they started targeting us and going after us? And what could they do with it? What could they leverage an initial bit of access to, and where could they end up with this? This is an example of how far this can go. Obviously, it's left Microsoft's leadership badly shaken, enough that they are willing to break things now to prevent this from happening further. So why don't we just skip that part for ourselves and just go to the lessons learned from the incident and apply them to our organizations, save ourselves a lot of heartache. So yeah, it's a hot mess. We'll see how this one continues to develop. I'm sure it's going to make a lot of noise for quite a bit longer. Now, if we can get Doug to stop floating around the studio with his imitation of Major Tom, let's see if we can go back over to him for the last story of today.
Thank you, Jason. I guess that email I got from Bill Gates this morning offering me a large dollar job to work for him is probably fake.
Possibly.
Yeah, could be. I mean, it's feasible, but yeah, it's probably fake. Thank you, Jason. And finally, robocalls with fake voices say it isn't so, but apparently robocalls with fake voices are being used in the U.S. presidential campaign this year. A robocall voice that appears to be United States President Joe Biden is being investigated by the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. The calls, which are going out on Sunday, told recipients in the voice of Joe Biden to avoid voting in the New Hampshire presidential primary being held today. And Joe Biden's not actually on the ballot, so, but he's some kind of technicality. But the voice sounds like him. But it said the content seemed to be artificially generated. Hello, Joe Biden. I will be. Yeah, I'm sure it was better than that. But, does anybody fall for these things? I mean, do you really think Joe Biden is calling you, telling you not to vote? or Donald Trump is calling you, telling you not to vote, or anybody else, I'm going to put one up for me. Maybe I can get in the president. But I mean, telling you, that's going to be the day. I will rule with an iron fist and an iron glove. Yeah, that's what this country needs. A new round of authoritarianism. I'll straighten you out. But the president calls you and tells you not to vote for him. Yeah, seems a bit unlikely. Now, when Bill Gates invites me to a private island, I'm on the next plane out. Always happened. That one's probably real. But the caller ID on the call was spoofed, and it was spoofed to be a personal cell phone number of a prominent New Hampshire Democrat. Now, if you aren't from the United States, the Democrats are Labor and the Republicans are Tories. So just so we keep it straight. But it is going to be an interesting presidential election year. Anyone want to hire me to move to their country? I could do the news from there. I mean, like, you know, some nice place, Portugal, somewhere. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I will be next live at the JW Marriott on the 27th of February in Atlanta, Georgia, the Peachtree State or something like that. That's the news. Thanks, Jason. And we'll see you Friday on the next edition of the Security Weekly News.